Howdy y'all, it's Curious Raven. I hope y'all are doing great today. Today is the 8th day of Advent. Well, we're only 2 days away from Christmas. Tomorrow is Christmas Eve, and I hope y'all are spending a lot of time with your family. I am joined by Marie Fields of Nightmares. Please go over to her channel and give her some love. Let's get into these stories. Story 1. Have you ever wondered if the places we walk through daily might hide secrets darker than itself? This thought struck me one foggy winter evening as I strolled through an old lane in my hometown, Shimla. It was a shortcut I rarely took, lined with British-era bungalows, their grandeur long consumed by time. The land had a particular reputation, whispers of shadows and voices carried from nowhere. But isn't every hill station full of such tales? What made me pause that evening was the sound of anklets, faint, rhythmic, and coming closer. Was someone walking behind me? Turning around, I found the lane empty, except for the fog curling lazily around the lamppost. I laughed at myself thinking of old stories my grandmother used to tell of spirits bound to anklets, forever wandering. But then I felt it. A soft, cold breath rushed past my ear, and a voice, low yet melodic, whisper, "Why did you leave me here?" The voice froze me in place. Who was speaking? And why did the words feel so personal? Summoning courage, I turned around again. This time she stood there, a woman in a pale traditional sari, her face obscured by a veil. Her anklets shimmered faintly, reflecting light that wasn't there. "Who are you?" I managed to ask, my voice trembling. Instead of replying, she tilted her head, and suddenly memories came flooding back. Memories that weren't mine. Memories of a man, a lover, leaving her at the altar. Memories of her waiting in vain, and eventually stepping into the well at the edge of this very lane. Her anklets, the only sound before silence engulfed her. "Do you remember now?" she whispered again. I shook my head, denying the connection. "No, this isn't for me. I don't know you." But her veil, slightly revealing hollow dark eyes, not of anger, but of sorrow. "You carry his shadow. That's enough." The fog grew thicker, and with it, her form began to dissolve. The last thing I heard was the fading jingle of anklets, like a memory slipping away. I left the lane running, heart pounding. Was it a warning? A message? Or had I unknowingly crossed paths with a guilt that wasn't mine but chose me anyway? Even now, on quiet nights when I hear anklets faintly echoing in the distance, I wonder how many shadows do we unknowingly carry with us. Number 2. One night I was walking home down an alleyway between a supermarket and a pharmacy. I had been warned that the area was a renowned horror spot, yet put that off to mere rumor. As I entered the alleyway, my body was filled with the most intense feeling of fear. I could see in my mind's eye a human-like figure ascend out of the ground behind me. Its entire being consisted of black, and it started to follow me. As I got halfway down the alley, it vanished. I never went down that path ever again at night. I understand that what was local gossip was true. What is the scariest experience you have had? Number 3. When I was about 10 years old back in the early 90s, and sometimes a bike to get around was all you had for an entertainment. I went everywhere on that thing. One Saturday evening, when the weather had started out just fine and totally clear and sunny, I was hanging out a block down from my house, which was a 65-plus-year-old craftsman's home, at my friend's house, who wanted me to stay the night. Neither one of our single moms was home yet, as they both worked weekends to make ends meet, so we got to be left to our own devices until later that night. We agreed I should ride back to my house before it got too dark and grab some board games and fun things to do. On my way home, the wind starts to pick up more, and cloud cover had moved in, making me pick up the pace more because it was starting to sprinkle a tad. When I got back to my house, no one was home, and the back door was unlocked, per usual back then. Latchkey kids who lose their keys and had to leave a back door unlocked. So, I left my bike on my front lawn and walked around my house to the back door. I went in and everything seemed fine, but the house did feel oddly quiet on this day, and I got a strange vibe like I shouldn't be there, and I had no clue why. I went inside, shut the door behind me, and went on with my business. Grabbed a few games from my room, headed to the front living room since our house front was out there on the other side of the house, and my bedroom was in back. I called her to verify which games I should bring, and while we were on the phone casually talking, it started raining harder, and we both heard a huge thunderclap outside. Suddenly, the back door of the house where I had just been flew open out of nowhere. This was a heavy old door, and I know I latched it. And that's why I became terrified. The door has never blown open so hard before, but I shrugged it off as being the wind that I had experienced coming home and figured I hadn't latched the door all the way. My friend heard it through the phone, and I told her that I'd close it on my way back there when I leave to come back, and we went on talking for a moment or two before I was going to head up and head back on my bike, still laying on the front lawn, when suddenly I started hearing heavy footsteps coming from the back of the house where the door was. Every hair on my body raised up for some reason, and I got stiff with fear as I knew it wasn't my mom. My older brother wasn't home, and he had been gone with friends for hours already, and I didn't recognize the sound of those footsteps. They felt foreign, like someone that didn't belong in my house was entering my back door. I told my friend that I think someone just came in the back door of my house, and it's not anyone I know. She freaked and told me to drop everything, get out of the house, and come back to her house right now. Out of sheer terror, I flew out my front door, leaving it open, dragged my bike out to the street damn near, and fled like hell down the center of the street, so that if someone should pass by me in a vehicle, they'd see me and I could ask for help. My friend's mom had called the police while I was headed back to her place, and a bunch of cops surrounded my house, guns drawn, and went in to investigate what was going on. My mom came home to a scene first to see all this. She thought something terrible had happened. The cops didn't find anyone inside the house, but what they did find was large men's size muddy shoe prints that went from the back porch through the back door, past the dining table and the kitchen, traveling through 2 rooms and almost making it to the living room, where I was at, until they suddenly stopped where the carpet to the living room started. The shoes we had in our house did not match the size or type of shoe was found on the floor throughout the house. Our back door didn't have any amount of mud like the shoes that had come in the house either. We had thick, beautiful grass and clean concrete back there, and a clothesline. Still to this day, none of it makes sense. No one knew what the fuck to make of it, but I'll never forget it. Story 4.
This is my first time ever really putting this story out into the world, but I figured it was a good idea to share my experience. I went through all of this, and it was a pretty intense time in my life, so maybe it's best to get it off my chest at some point, and now seems as good a time as any. When I was young, my mother was pretty heavy into the occult and claimed herself to be a practicing witch. Whether or not that is related is completely up to you on whether or not you think that stuff is real or has any effect on people around those that are practicing. But because of that, us kids were always hyper aware of the supernatural side of things. We were aware of ghosts, hauntings, demons, and all that. and I've always had a pretty strong belief in the paranormal. And I'm pretty sure we had a haunted house back then, but that's not really here nor there. A little context on who I was at the time. I'm female, and when this all happened, I believe I was just turning 16. Because of my mother's obsession with dark things, I do not scare easily. Mostly because she always had a word to say about anything scary or strange. I have a pretty solid foundation, and there is very little that'll make me jump, flinch, cringe, or be otherwise afraid. My sister, on the other hand, seemed to have been the opposite growing up, in that you could make her jump and scream by just going, "Ah," really loudly at her, even if she knew you were there the entire time. Growing up, the house we lived in was only a 2-bedroom, so it was always a struggle with my younger sister about the room. I was 16, she was 14, and it was a pain to have to sleep there with her in the room because she had no respect for privacy at all. I hit a point where I was pretty tired of being in the same room as her, so I asked my parents if we could figure something out for me moving out of the room. They had told me that they weren't willing to get in the middle of it and that we needed to sort it out for ourselves. My idea of sorting it out, I would just move my bed out of the bedroom and down into what was basically an entry landing for the basement. It wasn't really large enough to be a room, and it was just there as a place to store things outside the laundry room, but to me, it was the best option. At least that's what I thought. It didn't take long for me to really understand how bad of an idea it was to set up my bed in the basement. About 2 nights into this new arrangement, my sister and I were up late watching some dumb TV show on Netflix, and I decided that I needed to head to bed. I said goodnight and headed down onto the landing to get dressed and shut off the light before lying down to go to sleep. No more than a few minutes after lying down, I heard a voice say, "What are you doing?" in a deep whispering tone. I opened my eyes and looked over to my doorway thinking my sister had come down, and I started to say, "I'm going to sleep," when I noticed no one was there. I shook it off after a moment thinking I was just losing my mind when I heard it again, but this time it said, "You're not welcome here." At this point in time, my guess was that it was just a spirit trying to mess with me. Since my mom was into the witchy stuff and all of her occult stuff was in the room next to me, the laundry room, I just assumed it was some spirit that had been attached to something she owned or was brought forward by something she did, and they were messing with me. Thinking it was just a spirit, I told it that this was my home and that it was welcome to stay, but that I had power over it as it was in my domain. I don't know why I felt the need to tell it that I had the power. I just remember that being something I needed to do. I just kind of sat up and waited to see if this thing was going to cause me any more problems. And when I noticed what looked like a hand coming out from underneath the laundry room door. When I say a hand, it seriously looked like a person's hand, but it was pitch black and it was reaching out toward me from under the door. I stood up and opened the door to see what the hell this thing was, but when I did, there was nothing there. Obviously, I wasn't feeling too good about any of this, but I, again, just thought I was tired and that I was dealing with a basic spirit/ghost that was messing with me. I told it that I wasn't scared of it and that I was going to sleep, then lied back down and pulled the blanket over me. This is when it got genuinely terrifying. I felt the blanket shift slightly, and as soon as I leaned up to look, I felt a hand grab my ankle and pull towards the laundry room. And when I say that it pulled, it absolutely felt like an adult grabbing my leg and trying to yank me away from my bed and into another room. I freaked out and ran over to the stairs and just stared at my bed thinking, what the hell was that? I gave up and decided I would just sleep on the couch and then move my stuff back into the bedroom in the morning. The next morning when I woke up, I thought maybe I was just dreaming it or that it was just my brain being stupid, but then I looked down at my ankle. My right ankle, the one that was grabbed the previous night, had a massive bruise on it, about the size of a very large hand. The bruise wrapped around my entire ankle, and it kind of looked like the kind of bruise you would get if you were grabbed too hard or held down by someone. This solidified that whatever this was likely not a good spirit and was probably demonic. I told my mother about it. I showed her the bruise, and she said she would cleanse the basement. She did her cleansing and said that it was all good, but I didn't go back down there to sleep. I immediately moved everything back into my sister's room and just told her that she was going to have to deal with it. After that event, I never went back down into the laundry room or even down those stairs, because every time I would hit the top step, I would feel like something was down there and waiting for me. This was honestly the most terrifying night of my life. It was probably my most solid experience with the paranormal. I'm just thankful that whatever this thing was, it wasn't able to latch onto me and follow me out of that basement, because I don't know what the hell I would have done.
Story 5.
This happened when I went to a family reunion some time ago. Back then, I didn't know about black-eyed kids or that it even existed, but I have had plenty of paranormal experiences. So when I was talking to some people in a comment section elsewhere about this one, they thought it was a BEK, so I thought I would share it. I was about 14 at the time. My little sister Allie was 7. There were other kids there, all of our cousins and my brother Sean, but this was mainly about Allie and I. The reunion was taking place at a local park and was set up at a shelter. There were lots of people around, lots of food and drinks, and thankfully, lots for us kids to do to stay entertained. There were 2 playgrounds at this park. One was very old, like I wouldn't let my kids play on it without a dozen tetanus shots, and since it was all made of metal, anything you had to grab or sit on was always on fire in the summer. The other playground was much newer and a lot more fun to play on. It was mostly plastic, or at least was metal covered with plastic, so kids didn't fry on it. It was bigger and also had a bigger swing set and other nearby things to play on. Of course, the shelter was closer to the old one, so we were a little further away from the adults. Probably wasn't the best idea not having any adults over there, but there were a few older cousins and other parents with their kids nearby. We spent a lot of time on the playground that day. We even managed to sneak a jug of tea from the party and cups away in a wagon to have our own little party under part of the playground. The under part was built like a playhouse and had a window and door that opened and even a mailbox. I loved it. Anyways, we had probably been out there for 5 or 6 hours by now. The sun was beginning to set as the sky was taking on that pretty pink and orange color, but it definitely wasn't dark yet. Some people had left, but of course, our parents were still there, so we continued to play. At one point, we decided to play a mix of hide and seek and tag, where you hide. If you're found, you can try to run from the it person until you were finally caught. One of our cousins was it at this point, and we all went and hid. He found a few of us, but then ended up saying he had to leave so we could all come out. I told him I'm still not convinced he actually had to leave and was just tired of seeking, as he was known to do that, but I digress. So we all started coming out, and that's when I noticed I didn't see Allie. I asked Sean if he saw her, and he said no, so I started looking around for her when I saw her standing near the fence line, which separated the park from the lake and property on the other side. I don't think there was a house over there, but the lake was over there as well as a bunch of land, trees, bushes, just that. So when I started to approach my sister and saw that she was talking to another little girl that was on the other side of the fence, I was curious as to why she was there and not with an adult. This girl, however, didn't look normal. First, she had on a really outdated dress. I now recognize it as like a Victorian era style. It was long and puffy, like it had a petticoat underneath it. There were layers and ruffles all over with puffy sleeves. She also had on a small bonnet-type hat and had tight black curly hair framing her face. At first glance, it was odd, but a pretty cute outfit. However, all of this was shadowed when I saw her face. I thought the cap on her bonnet was covering it, but in actuality, she had no eyes. It terrified me. I don't know what she was saying, but I cut Allie off as I grabbed her arm, pulling her back away from the fence. Now, unless the girl climbed over the fence, I knew we were safe, as that fence went all the way up to the parking lot. We would have made it to our parents before she reached the lot. But as I pulled her back, I remember saying something like, "Who are you talking to? And what's wrong with your eyes? Are you okay?" Allie said that she noticed her wave when she went to hide and was also curious as to why she was over there, so she approached her. She claims she didn't notice her eyes until I pointed them out, but even afterwards, she didn't seem fazed by it, which was weird. It was freaking me out. Why is it not scaring the 7-year-old? The little girl only said she needed help and asked for us to go to the water with her. We both tried questioning more as to what she needed help with, but she refused to answer, always pretty much repeating the same thing. And it was creepier because it was always in the same tone, but was never with any inflections. So I again asked her what was wrong with her eyes, and after a pause, she said, "I can see everything. Please, I will show you, by the water." No. I said we would get an adult to help, grabbed Allie again, and pulled her away from the fence. Now, my birthday had just recently passed, and my parents got me a camera with replaceable film, so I took it with me everywhere. I even had a little case that I carried it in that went over my shoulder, and I had been taking a lot of pictures that day. I did not hesitate to snap a photo of this girl as we walked back towards the playground. Allie and I walked straight up to my mom and told her what we saw, and she seemed disinterested in our story at first. Then I mentioned something being wrong with her eyes, and that apparently caught her attention. We then walked her back to the fence. However, the girl was gone. Allie and I insisted that it was real, but my mom just shrugged it off as either someone playing a prank Or maybe the girl found her guardians and helped her. We never forgot about it though. Allie didn't seem as disturbed by it, but man, I had a hard time sleeping that night. I kept my lamp on that night and even tried reading something to get my mind off of it before I finally fell asleep. It was probably about 2 months later when my mom finally took me to get my film developed from my camera. I was going through the pictures. I remember specifically taking the picture of the girl, and I wanted to show my mom as proof I was right. I was at that age that I was doing that on a quite normal and annoying basis, I'm sure. However, much to my dismay and relief, the picture was of a grassy field, the fence, and the glistening lake among those photos. But there was no girl standing at the fence. There was no way she would have been able to move out of view for that photo and then go right back to where she was in the amount of time it took me to hold the camera up and snap the photo. I was in disbelief and still am to this day. I have no explanation for it. I even showed the picture to Allie, who remembered the events and was just as surprised at my picture as I was. So, as mentioned, telling some people online about it, they feel there were several indicators of a black-eyed kid. If it was, that was the only time I've ever witnessed one, and it scared the hell out of me. Of all the paranormal encounters I've had, that was probably one of the worst. What would have happened if we went with her to the lake? It freaks me out just thinking about it.
All right, y'all, that is the end of the story today. I hope y'all enjoyed. I will see y'all on Christmas Eve tomorrow. Until then, remember it's scary out there. Please like and subscribe.
I live inside my own world of make-believe. Kids screaming in the cradles, profanities. I see the world through